Hey team, it's Doc Bryan here today. We're going to review the power of the basics. If you remember, this was presented a few weeks ago as both lecture content and a QR online YouTube video. And so basically I've just copied this and I'm going to hit a few things. We're basically going to do a power of the basics 2.0, and we're going to look at it through the perspective of the after action report and process improvement from our 21 October training, right? This session is a review of the power of the basics with a pointed reference to the training. The goal being to break down barriers to success while improving critical skills, applications in EMS, basically to get better at the foundational information of the basics. Again, if you can't walk, it's tough to run, and this ain't no multiple choice test. And I think that was a tremendous opportunity for us coming out of that training, and we'll get to it in the after action to follow. And the lawyer time. I'm not your medical director. I'm not the state medical director. Nothing I say supersedes your medical director, your SOPs, your provider level or certification. All right, team. So this is an after action report and a PI challenge. That's process improvement. After action report and process improvement challenge based on our 21 October training. So this slide might look familiar, right? We did the power of the basics a couple months ago, and this is basically a copy of that slide. I just changed some of the wording a little bit. And you'll find that the next slide in this training is actually just the power of the basics for you to review if you want to, 4 minutes and 30 seconds. So what are we going to talk about here today? So we talked all through our training in Ethos and BEMS about how complex scenarios are built on basic foundations. So very simple skills, understood well, performed in the appropriate time. That's what it is, right? And so what we did on 21 October was make an uncomfortable scenario in a confined space in order to not test your ability to do a technical rescue, which we made very clear, not have you do something wazoo that you'd never seen or done before. It was literally just to see how you applied the very basic foundations we've covered since summer in a scenario that was slightly stressful. And the reason why is, as we've discussed, you cannot conceivably account in protocols or anything else in training other than having difficult scenario training like we did for all the possibilities we'll run into in EMS. It cannot happen. It's absolutely impossible. So you have to make foundational protocols that are correct when applied correctly in any scenario, like an all hazards approach, which we talked about in the power of the basics, right? So the 21 October was an opportunity to see very basic knowledge fail when put into a more uncomfortable scenario. That's all. Now, people don't like to hear the word fail, but as you know, failure is just another word for an opportunity to improve, right? So everybody had a different experience on 21 October with regards to what was challenging and what wasn't. Some people might have been bored out of their minds. I hope not. I certainly wouldn't have been. Some people were challenged immediately, right? The point was nothing but to see how that scenario impacted your understanding of your foundational knowledge. I know that sounds tricky, but we told you that's all it was. Everything we do at Ethos is going to be just grounded on the basic foundational knowledge. And the reason why I do that is I have found in my experience that the difference between absolute apex predator performers in basketball, football, special operations, medicine, is just how well they perform the basic, because that is what gets you through complex and highly stressful scenarios, as we talked about in the power of the basics class, right? So an example in this scenario, soft skills for personal improvement from your C7 Ranger Daily day 1 class in Ethos, right? Did I show up ready for a realistic confined space exercise? That's a question. I'm not telling you. Only you know that. But I'm going to tell you that if you were to ask me, it didn't seem like many people did. And it wasn't about being a technical rescue expert, which we were very clear with you on in the warning order, right? It was about your medicine in this scenario, not technical rescue. And the answer for many was you showed up not ready. And then that's not what I'm trying to elucidate here. What I'm trying to get you to do is ask yourself why. Why did you not show up with your equipment check? Why did you not show up with equipment that fit? Why did you not have equipment, some of you, right? That's where the opportunity to improve comes from. Not the fact that you didn't show up optimally ready, because none of us do. I didn't show up on the 21st totally optimally ready. But the question is, why not? And that is where we can all get better, right? To include myself. My chest decon training or my chest needle decompression training sets were not optimally ready, and I wasn't optimally ready. And I'm very honest with myself and with you about that, right? I could have been better in a lot of things, and so how do I get better? And that's what I'm asking you. So have you asked yourself why you showed up less than optimally prepared just to train? We haven't even talked about the foundational information that was challenged. If not, now is the time to implement that C7 challenge of process improvement. Pick one thing that was probably the biggest reason that you could impact on why you weren't optimally ready, and then put a process in place to improve it, right? Now let's talk about soft clinical skills. And a great example that impacted every group is the OPA versus NPA discussion, which we discussed afterwards, which was fantastic. This is a fantastic opportunity. This is actually exactly what we're trying to do. Now, do you think I was purposely trying to train you on OPA and NPA? If you think so, then you're missing the point of what we do here, right? No, that's not the case. The lesson here is what's important. And you can take the lesson and apply it to every single thing we do in EMS and in life, right? So many could state the indications and contraindications for an OPA use in the after-action hot wash. I would say everybody could, right? This is why I use an OPA. This is why I use an NPA in a clinical scenario. Yet every single group that came through that station used an OPA, caused emesis, caused airway compromise in a closed place, in a closed, confined space that they had chosen to not optimize. So in other words, you see this cascade of what happens in a complex scenario. One bad decision, in this case, right, it was not optimizing your position, right? Then the next decision, which was gray, right, OPA versus NPA, became a cataclysmic event and a death. Why? Well, yes, you knew OPA versus NPA, and there's gray area there. But again, foundational knowledge. Where there really isn't a lot of gray is doing some type of maneuver to the patient in whatever context that there's a lot of gray in and a lot of ways to do it, so that you could manage the airway. And if you didn't, which no one did in this case, right? I'm talking about first in people that use OPA and cause vomiting, which was every group's first in, right? Then that cascaded, right? So now I made this micro decision to not optimize my position on the patient so I could actually handle the airway. And then the next decision became, in that context, I used an OPA. The person vomited, and then the next thing came. Okay, now I've not moved the patient to where I could manage your airway. Then I chose an OPA, which was, of the two things, OPA versus NPA, in that situation, the more risky one. And then almost everyone just let the patient vomit and asked for suction or other things, and didn't, again, do a basic foundational skill of, I have to manage this person's airway. And so everybody kind of coded. Do you see what I'm talking about? And it's not OPA, it's not micro movements to optimize managing a patient's position, right? It's the context in which we download information. The question everyone here has to ask themselves, everyone, because it's not just about the OPA, NPA first in people, it's why I didn't optimize the patient scenario. What is the barrier from anything I failed to do in that confined space? And why did that happen? So in reality, the question everybody's asked is, why did the cadre put me in these confined space or very stressful scenarios, and why did it impact my what seems to be very foundational basic knowledge of OPA versus NPA or micro moving versus macro moving or anything else? Why? The answer to that why for your individual experience in that scenario is the barrier we have to break down, right? So now, to go a little further on the OPA component of it, right? No, I reviewed the NREMT education completely, and there's no place where an OPA, right, is stated to be used until failed, or any of the other feedback that we got when we did our hot wash, right? This was not a Kobayashi-Maru scenario. This is a very basic scenario. The goal was actually to have everybody manage an airway, do a BLS, NALS, really cool scenario where you could do needle decompression, crikes, very challenging airways. The BLS team was going to be managing a pelvic fracture and a femur fracture in my particular scenario, and extricate in a SCED. All was supposed to happen. You had, like, after in briefing, about 35 minutes, but no one got that far. Why? It really about a 15-minute scenario. Think about that, right? It was not a Kobayashi-Maru, like, cannot win scenario. It was quite the opposite. It was designed to be 15 minutes by a professional that just applied operational foundational knowledge in a very simple way, right? And so ask yourself, if you were the person that said that's what they trained me to be, did they? Did they train you to choose an OPA and someone you were told was responsive and moaning and groaning in a position where you couldn't even manage their airway? I don't think so. And if you did, why did you accept it? At this point in your career, whether you're 6 months in or 6 years in, you really have to start asking yourself, is what this person standing in front of me saying objectively true? In what context do they mean it? What I find all the time as a trainer who then oftentimes asks someone, now what did you take from what I just said, like I would do in this course, right, is I find people take things completely out of context all the time. And it's a real objective check to myself to say, hey, you have to be really careful when you're discussing these things, what you say and how it's taken in by a very diverse group of EMS providers, learners, whatever you want to refer to ourselves as when we're in the giving information versus receiving information, optics. So optics are important. What's the context? If someone can come up to me after this and tell me, no, in my EMS class, I was taught you put it in an OPA, period. When they fail, you remove it, no matter what the context is. Then I would, next thing I would just ask you is, well, how do you feel about that now? That's why we did what we did. But the thing is, this is not about OPA, right? This is about everything we've learned. How has this helped me? How could this harm me? How am I supposed to download this based on all the information I have? How many layers of the onion have I peeled back to really look into what they're saying? Right, and in the OPA MPA discussion is literally just all it is a keyhole I want you to look through, basically to ask yourself these pertinent questions of what really did you learn? Am I taking it in context? Am I able to know it well enough to apply it contextually in all the amazing scenarios that we might run into as EMS providers every day? And that's what I'm asking you to do. And so after this slide is, again, the power of the basics. And remember, I'm not telling you anything that's new. And I'm not telling you how to do anything, right? Our PA protocols and our medical directors and our chiefs tell us that. And all I'm trying to do is let you know this was a great example, right, of showing up prepared, yes or no, why I showed up less than optimally prepared, and then take that and then say, okay, which part of that can I most impact for tomorrow to be better tomorrow? And the OPA, NPA is just a very simple thing that we showed that says, hey, in that exact context of not micro moving someone so I had access to their airway without all the information I needed, was that the best choice? And the answer can be a lot of answers, but the reality is if you have that kind of information downloaded in such a rigid schoolhouse, or what some refer to in the after action as a SCAR, from a multiple choice type mindset of someone who taught you who may not themselves have been the most knowledgeable person, or maybe we took out of context, right? Then this is the time to not break down OPA and PA barriers, but all those barriers. Open up your mind. Try to apply the knowledge you have and challenge yourself. Look it up. How many people after that, October 21 hot wash, took time on shift or some other time with the supercomputer that's in your hand to look up the NREMT recommendations on using an OPA, and then read them and say, how did I have downloaded in my head that in that circumstance where I literally knew I didn't have control of an airway, I knew I wasn't optimally in place, and I knew I didn't have anybody to help me, that I chose that one, and then defended it robustly sometimes in the hot wash, which I love. That's what I want to hear, because you know what? If we don't have these discussions, then it's really difficult to get better. So I want everybody to take a minute to do that. If you want to take a minute to look at the next slide, which is just the power of the basics, same one as we went with before, and reach out to me anytime with information, okay? But remember, right, everything we do is just foundational knowledge done in the most optimal way at the most optimal time to maximize our outcomes for ourselves and our patients, right? And so if we don't have these really fun interactions like this, or that challenge you to not only understand the foundational information, but put yourselves in really challenging scenarios, hopefully in training, right? And to be honest with ourselves about how we've downloaded that information. Is it optimally downloaded so that when a challenging scenario comes up, you use it in a way that's best time, best outcome? All right, team, I want to talk about the pearls of the basics, right? The basics are foundational skills that other competencies are grounded in. If our basic foundational competencies are not sound, we will struggle to build complex competence on that foundation. Think math or the Leaning Tower of Pisa, right? Great building, but the foundation was flawed. In math, you can build a complex equation attempting to solve fusion energy or some other incredibly challenging physics problems. But if your basic math of 2 plus 2 is flawed, the entire weeks-long process of building that equation will be incorrect. This is how to think of complex life scenarios and EMS scenarios. We can never study all the possible scenarios we may encounter in medicine, in EMS, in life. Think the all hazards approach, right, to disasters. And so we build basic foundations that will work in all scenarios if performed correctly. Perform the basics well and then practice complex scenarios that challenge you to apply the basics in combination and sequence in order to maximize your outcome. Clinical scenarios and simulation are designed to present you an opportunity to apply many basic skills in a challenging manner and sequence, so to improve your basic skills as they apply to a complex scenario, which is a scenario that requires many basic skills to be performed in sequence in order to maximize outcome. That's all they are. And that's, by the way, how you mentally approach a complex scenario. Because if you approach some completely overwhelming scenario as if it is just a giant, incredibly complex scenario that's overwhelming, then it's more likely to be overwhelmed, right? But if you understand the basics, that the most complex thing we do really just comes down to doing many basic foundational skills in a particular sequence to get the best outcome, then you understand everything's manageable, right? For example, our recent scenarios of the quote-unquote terrible airway, the basics were BSI, seen as safe, positional airway, BLS airway, set up for ALS airway that combines several basic ALS airway skills like suction, direct laryngoscopy, basic skills. This was designed to provide you an opportunity to test all the soft and hard skills required to manage a worst-case scenario pre-hospital airway, but recognize that not a single procedure was not a basic skill, right? Positional airway is a positional airway. One that if done in isolation would have seemed just mundane to most providers, right? If we just had you say, hey, there's blood boiling out of someone's mouth who's laying supine, and your BSI seen as safe, walk up, positionally turn them, and that was the end of the scenario, you'd be like, why am I here? This is so boring. But when you think about it, it was just 10 basic skills needing to be done in the most appropriate sequence and in a timely manner. That was all that was required to address these advanced scenarios. All right, the scenario only required basic skills. It just required many of the basic skills done in the appropriate sequence. This is the reality of all complex tasks. They are an amalgamation of many foundational and basic skills performed in a sequence, whether it's math, doing a very complex physics equation, or building, right, an engineering problem, or in the case of emergency medicine, right, it's just foundational skills of emergency medicine, which is much more timely than math or engineering, right? Because his life is on the line and they're dying. But at the end of the day, remember, the most complex problem we face comes down to doing the foundational and basic skills in the appropriate sequence in a timely manner to maximize outcome. Doesn't matter if it's one provider and 50 terrible casualties, or a whole team in a level 1 trauma center and 1 casualty. It's just everyone doing basic foundational skills in the appropriate best case sequence to get the best outcome for that patient or those patients. And that's all it is. And that is not just germane to what we do in EMS and what we're training to do, but in life, right? When you think about it, all the things that overwhelm us are just a whole bunch of little things stacked on top of each other. And if we just knock them all down perfectly in the right sequence, life goes better for us. And it's the same with these scenarios. So as you approach our complex scenarios and things grow more complex, we don't want to see more people pulling back from training or saying, I've been doing this for a long time. What we want to see is everyone grasping the fact that these very complex scenarios, they only appear complex if you look at them as a whole. But if you break them down to, I just need to do 15 of the most basic things that if I did them in isolation I would think was boring, but I have to do them all together in the right timing, the right sequence, and I will have the best outcome. That's how you can manage complex scenarios, complex life problems, complex EMS and emergency medicine scenarios. I hope this helps. I look forward to your feedback. Doc out. As usual, we got to talk about the lawyers. So I am not your medical director. I'm not giving medical advice. We're just two professionals having a discussion. And it's important that we note that, given this will be open content.